Our story begins with a person who had a scale drawn on his hand. He spread a piece of cloth in front of him, then placed a cup inside it, but broke it into very small pieces using the hammer he had, and put them in his shoe, then walked with it. We then move on to Stephen, who was still asleep, as he had tied himself to a wooden plank next to the bed, spread sand on the floor, and stuck tape on the door. He had done all this to ensure he wouldn't move while sleeping. After confirming that, he goes to talk to his mother and eat his special fish meal. He wanted to take her with him, but it was very difficult since she only had one fin. At that moment, Stephen hurriedly got dressed to try to catch the bus because he was late for work, and he fell asleep on the shoulder of a passenger from extreme fatigue and lack of sleep. And as soon as he arrives at his job, which was a museum, he meets a woman who was fascinated by a miniature model of the Egyptian pyramids. He takes her and shows her the mummy, explaining the mummification process in ancient Egypt, telling her that they used to remove all the body's organs except the heart because they believed it would help them in the afterlife. At that moment, the museum director comes and scolds him, telling him that he is not a tour guide, but his job is only to sell toys to children. Then another girl who is a fan of Stephen comes and confirms to him that they will have dinner together tomorrow at 7 o'clock for a romantic date. After finishing work, Stephen goes to the park and sits next to an actor pretending to be a statue. He talks to him about feeling like his body starts moving on its own while he sleeps, and that sometimes he suddenly crawls to strange places. That's why he tries to stay awake all night, and when he returns home, he keeps solving puzzles and reading many books to stimulate his mind and stay alert. But suddenly he feels extremely tired and finds himself crawling in a strange place filled with mountains. Then he hears a voice calling him, telling him to go back to sleep, that this is not his place, and that he should not be here or surrender his body. Stephen searches for the source of the sound but finds no one. He puts his hand in his pocket and pulls out a pure gold scarab beetle, and when he looks behind him, he discovers that there are large machines and many people shooting at him. The voice returns to tell him to run away, and Stephen manages to escape from them. He goes to the city where people continue to chase him. Then he finds a group of people and sneaks among them until he reaches another group of people who were praising someone named Harrow, who claimed to be an assistant to the god Ament. He could determine if a person was good or not through a scale drawn on his hand. They ask if anyone wants to try it, and an elderly woman approaches them. When she holds his hand, the scale moves and turns red, but she looks surprised because she hasn't committed any wrongdoing. However, the man tells her that she will not be righteous in the future, and the god has decreed her death. And suddenly her soul is pulled from her, and she dies, while everyone resumes their praise. Then a person named Hayer appears, who immediately recognizes Stephen and thinks he is a mercenary. But Stephen tries to explain to him that he is from London, that he works in a gift shop, and that he is doing all this because he wants to return to his country. Hayer asks him to return the golden scarab, but the voice returns again, warning Stephen not to hand over the scarab. However, Stephen doesn't care and wants to give it to him, but he can't control his body, which keeps moving on its own. In the end, he is captured, and the scarab is taken from him. At that moment, he faints and falls into a coma. And when he wakes up, he finds that all the guards are dead, and the scarab in his hand is covered in blood, and he doesn't understand what is happening. He goes to get a car and flee the place, but they keep chasing him until one of the guards manages to get into the car and tries to kill Stephen, while another tries to point a gun at him. But Stephen falls into another coma, and when he wakes up, he finds the man dead and the car stopped. Suddenly, he discovers that he has woken up from his sleep to find that everything that happened was just a dream and nothing more than that. But while he was sitting in front of the television, he noticed the fish he had, and he was surprised when he discovered that it had grown new fins. He takes the fish and goes to the fish shop, where he is surprised to find out that he bought the fish from him the previous day. And when he looks at the clock, he remembers his date with the girl at the gift shop, so he hurriedly prepares himself and goes to the restaurant to wait for her. However, she is late, and when he calls her, she tells him she doesn't want to know him anymore. She informs him that today is Sunday, and their date was on the scheduled day, which means he has been unconscious for 3 days. Stephen decides to eat alone, orders meat despite being a vegetarian, and cries because he was fond of that girl, and he lost his chance. When he returned home, Stephen kept eating the sweets, shocked by the events happening to him. But suddenly the candies fell from his hand onto the floor, and when he was picking them up, he noticed scratch marks on the wood and under the carpet as well. So he moved the table over the same scratches, and when he looked up, he found a piece of wood out of place. He lifted it to discover his phone and keys in the hollow beneath it. And when he opened the phone, he found more than 50 calls from someone named Layla, Suddenly, the phone rang, and it was Layla calling. She told him that she had been looking for him for 3 months, but she was surprised by his English accent and handwriting. And suddenly, the call was cut off, but he heard a voice calling him. So he ran to find the source of the voice, but he found no one except his reflection in the mirror, where his second personality was moving on its own in the mirror. Stephen ran, saying that the whole place started to fade away. Then he left the house and took the elevator, but it stopped at the second floor, and a strange creature appeared in front of him. And when he ran towards it, the creature suddenly disappeared, and in its place appeared an elderly woman. When she exited the elevator, Stephen found himself back on the 5th floor, where his apartment was. Stephen woke up on the public bus, but he kept seeing the strange creature appearing everywhere he went. And when he arrived at the museum, he approached the guard and told him that there were people watching, but the guard told him that it was impossible to prevent people from entering the museum, as it was open to everyone. Then Dawn came to deliver some goods to the warehouse, but he shouted at her and left, because he had seen the assistant of the god Chima in the museum. So he went to ask the guard for help, but he was surprised when he discovered that the guard was also a follower of the god Chima. Stephen tried to convince them that the scarab was not with him, but Harrow told him that the scarab belonged to the god Khepri, whose image was painted on a column in the museum, and that it fulfilled the god's desire to achieve equality among people and govern them. And when Harrow held Stephen's hand to see what the scale would judge, the scale began to move without changing color, which made them realize that something was wrong with Stephen. Suddenly the door opened and everyone entered, but Stephen seized the opportunity and escaped. He went to the warehouse to finish his work late at night, but he heard a strange sound coming from inside. He followed the sound to find a strange creature on the wall, so he hid. When he heard a voice asking him to bring the pharaonic scarab, he threw his bag and ran, but the creature continued to chase him until he reached the bathroom. In the mirror, he saw his second personality, Marc, who wanted to take control of his body because he was the only one who could summon divine power. Finally, Stephen decided to surrender his body to Marc, and at that moment, the creature entered the bathroom. But Marc summoned divine power and killed it. Then Stephen woke up to find himself awake from his sleep, but he was tied up with a rope. And when he looked in the mirror, he tried to communicate with his second personality, but it didn't respond. He hurried to get dressed to go to work. And when he arrived at the museum, he discovered that the museum was empty of visitors. He approached the guard to ask him about the reason and found out that the pipes had burst. Stephen suggested that they go to check the surveillance cameras. In the control room, Stephen warned the guard about what he was about to see. Then they started playing the tape. They saw Stephen hiding behind a statue while the guard, Prof, sat waiting, but they saw Stephen running alone without anyone chasing him. Prof said he was crazy, but there was a strange creature running after Stephen and destroying everything in its path. When the priest entered the bathroom where Stephen was, Stephen had surrendered his body to his second personality, Marc, who managed to summon divine power. He destroyed the bathroom and killed the creature that was chasing him. While Stephen stood there, stunned by the events, he wondered why the creature didn't appear on the surveillance cameras. So he asked the guard to play the tape, only to discover that the person who appeared on the camera was Marc, and he was the one who had actually killed the creature. After the guard confirmed that Stephen was the cause of the chaos in the museum, he was summoned to the HR office to hand over his belongings and was fired from his job, as they suspected he was mentally unstable. The HR department provided him with a list of specialized psychiatrists, even though that is not his field. Stephen left the office feeling like he was going crazy. He went to the park to talk to his statue, and he told it that he now understands they were right, and they should have arrested him. He decided to search for the truth to prove to others that he is not crazy. In his apartment, he found a medal on the keys he had found in the first episode, bearing the same symbol as the one on the roof of the building that contains the safe deposit office. He went to the office and asked about a safe with the name O. Marc, but the guard didn't remember the name exactly, although he recognized him by his features, and he told him that Stephen's locker number is 43. The guard opened the safe, and Stephen entered to discover that it contained a gun, money, a passport in the name of Marc Spector, and the pharaonic scarab that had been appearing to him in his dreams. When he pressed the scarab, it started moving and pointed to its reflection on the glass door. Suddenly, Marc appeared and spoke with Stephen. Stephen was angry and unable to understand what was happening, but Marc tried to calm him down and told him that he was in danger and that he was the only one who could help him. Marc explained that he represents the god Khonshu, the god of the camera among the ancient Egyptians, and that they must protect the weak and achieve justice. But Stephen fell into a state of panic, and couldn't believe what was happening. He finally decided to take the bag and hand it over to the police so that no one else would be harmed. And when he left the vault, the power started to flicker, revealing the strange creature, which turned out to be the god Khonshu. Stephen started running and escaping through the streets, but all the doors were locked and the creature was chasing him. In the end, Khonshu appeared and told him to put the bag back in its place. But Stephen, in his shock, ran into the street and fell to the ground, only to find a motorcycle in front of him. Layla, who had been trying to call him the whole time, appeared and took him with her. On their way, Layla was punishing Stephen for not answering her calls, thinking that he didn't care about her. But Stephen was surprised when he discovered that Layla was his wife, or rather the wife of his second persona. He decided to take her to his apartment, and while she was there, she noticed that she was wondering how Stephen could speak hieroglyphics and understand ancient Egyptian symbols. Then she changed the subject and took the divorce paper to ask him to sign it, but Stephen refused. He saw her as very beautiful, and that Marc was the one who was foolish for wanting to leave her. Meanwhile, Marc started trying to stop Stephen from talking, and he discovered through a mirror that if Layla found out the truth about the pharaonic scarab, she would die. Stephen understood Marc's words, but he was shocked when he discovered that Layla was aware of the scarab. He was surprised to see her take the scarab out of his bag, assuming that Marc had changed Stephen's name and abandoned her to get the scarab for himself. But Stephen told her that his name was Stephen, not Marc, and that he worked in a gift shop and asked for her help. But their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door as the police had arrived to search the place. And when they started searching the apartment, they found no one, as Layla was hiding on the rooftop of the building. During the search, they found the passport and arrested Stephen on charges of forgery and theft. While being transported to the precinct, he discovered that Marc was a former agent in Egypt, where he killed everyone at a dig site. But instead of going to the station, he was handed over to the servant of the god. The servant of the god was aware of Stephen's situation and knew that he had three personalities: Stephen, Marc Spector, and the god Khonshu, who manifests in his body. Stephen saw the god Khonshu in front of him and told him to kill Harrow immediately, but Stephen couldn't. Harrow took Stephen to show him the place and offered him food, then told him that Harrow used to represent the avatar of the god Khonshu in the past. Harrow tried to brainwash Stephen, telling him that the god Neshu punishes criminals after it's too late, and that the god is the only one capable of protecting people and cutting evil from their lives before they make mistakes. But they need the pharaonic scarab to achieve that, because it is the only means to reach the tomb of the god Khmut. Stephen rejected Harrow's words and told him that the scarab was not with him. He thought that everything happening was wrong, and he didn't want to tell them that the scarab was with Layla, because they might kill her if they found out. Suddenly, Harrow's tone changed, and he grabbed his staff, which contained a piece of divine power, and threatened Stephen that if he didn't find the scarab, he would kill him. In these events, Layla suddenly appears holding the pharaonic scarab and tries to distract them. She tells Stephen to wear the god Khonshu's suit, but Stephen doesn't understand what she's saying. While they were trying to escape, Harrow struck the ground with his staff and summoned a jackal. Stephen and Layla escape to the floor that Harrow told them about, and they close the door. But Marc insists on taking control of Stephen's body. Stephen goes into a hysterical state when the jackal creature appears, and no one else can see it. In a moment of confusion, Stephen jumps out of the window, calls upon divine power, and dons the god Khonshu's suit. Stephen faces the priest in a fierce battle where he was on the verge of death, but Layla helps him and throws glass at the creature. However, the creature strikes them, and everyone thinks Stephen has gone mad because he was fighting with himself. Stephen ultimately decides to surrender his body and wear the god Khonshu's suit to try to get rid of the entity, but the priest chases him and doesn't let him go until he kills him. After a tough battle, Stephen removes the suit and discovers that the pharaonic scarab has been lost. Harrow returns to take the scarab and kills another person in the street, but Layla sees all this and cannot do anything because Harrow is stronger than her. At this moment, Marc becomes the one controlling Stephen, and Stephen remains unable to regain his body. Marc asks him to help complete the mission assigned to him by the god Khonshu, and Stephen discovers that Marc abandoned Layla because he wanted her as a substitute for himself to be his new taxi. The events unfold further when the god Khonshu appears again and continues to blame Marc for everything that happened. However, Marc asks for a second chance to make things right. Everyone is preparing to travel to Egypt, where they discover that there is another god, and this god had been imprisoned in a statue because of his mistakes. Meanwhile, Marc stumbles and falls in the desert, while Layla tries to wake him up in vain. In the end, a car arrives and gunfire starts on everyone, but Layla uses firecrackers to distract the attackers and blow up the car. After they save Stephen, everyone decides to head to the tomb in Egypt, but they need Marc's help with the mission. However, Stephen refuses Layla's request, saying he is no longer needed after the disappearance of the god Khonshu and the end of his power. Finally, Stephen agrees with Layla, and they decide to head together to the cemetery where they need to find a shortcut to enter. On the way, they discover an abandoned site and find a tent with tools that might help them on their journey. Here, Marc appears in the reflection and discovers that Stephen has started to like Layla. Marc gets angry, but Stephen doesn't care about what's happening. At that moment, Layla kept preparing Stephen and tying the rope to help him down into the pit. But while preparing, Layla tried to get close to him to kiss him. But Stephen hesitated and told her not to be upset with Marc because of what he did to her. He explained to her that Marc was doing it to protect her from betrayal because Khonshu wanted to take her body and control her to make her his avatar instead of Marc. He assured her that it was her right to know the truth. She told him that she didn't need protection from anyone and that she wanted someone straightforward like Stephen. At that moment, Stephen approached her and kissed her. Layla descended first, but Marc, who was controlling Stephen, hit him and knocked him down from above without using the rope because it was just a hook. And when he fell, he found in front of him the remains of ancient Egyptian statues, and he was very happy because he would be the first to reach this place. But he was surprised to find the number 14 written on the rock, and he knew it was Layla who had written this number because her father was an archaeologist. She was optimistic about the number because her father had wished to reach this place, and it had been his dream all his life. Stephen encouraged her and told her that if her father were alive, he would be proud of her in the way she reached this place. While they were on their way, the attraction between Layla and Stephen began to grow. They arrived at a room resembling a maze, and Layla was surprised to find lead on the ground in this ancient place. And Stephen knew that the place and the temple were symbols of the Eye of Horus, which the ancient Egyptians believed protected them from the torment of the afterlife. And they discovered that the goddess was embodied in a real pharaoh, and that the lines in the Eye of Horus represented the 6 senses of a human. They agreed to enter through the path that represents the shape of the tongue. While they were in the room, Stephen smelled a strange odor and found traces of blood and pieces of human flesh. He felt anxious and scared, but Layla threatened him and urged him to continue on his path. And Stephen found traces of blood on the ground, and he mentioned that there might be another exit. And when he looked up, he discovered an opening in the upper floor. He climbed up to find symbols on the walls indicating that her father was connected to the deity and trapped in a statue like a cocoon. They found an exit that could take them to the cemetery, but they were startled by the sound of gunfire. They quickly hid, but they found a strange creature entering, holding another person and devouring their body. Layla tried to move away and hide, but the creature noticed her and ran after her. And when it got closer to her, she threw a jar against the wall to distract it from Stephen. And at the moment the creature was about to reach her, Stephen threw a table down on it, allowing him to escape through the exit he found. While Layla was escaping, she reached the end of the path and tried to walk along the edge of the rocks to cross to the other side. Although the edge began to crumble beneath her feet, she managed to reach the other side, but the creature suddenly appeared behind her and pulled her back. Layla resisted with all her might, managed to break free from him, and cut off his hand. She tried to hit him, but he overpowered her and was choking her. However, before she died, she managed to pull out a flare at the last moment and stabbed it into his eye. They both fell, but Layla clung to the rocks and saved herself at the last moment. And suddenly she discovered that someone else was watching her and admiring her performance. And before she left him, he told her that he knew her father, Abdullah al-Fuli, one of the greatest archaeologists in Egypt. He told her how her father was killed by a group of mercenaries who were searching for artifacts, and Marc was among those mercenaries. They killed all the scientists at the excavation site, and her father was among them. Layla was shocked by this information, and she stood frozen in place from the shock. But in the end, she left him and moved on. At that moment, Stephen arrived at the pharaoh's tomb and saw Marc's reflection in the water. He thought Marc would drown him like he did with Layla, but the opposite happened, and he thanked Marc for clarifying to Layla the reason for their separation. And suddenly, Stephen found in front of him a column with Macedonian symbols. He couldn't believe himself, because the only pharaoh who had an impact on history and was associated with Egypt was Alexander the Great. But Stephen discovered that he had reached Alexander's tomb, and he became hesitant to open the sarcophagus. But in the end, he doesn't find the statue. However, after some thought, he realizes that Alexander the Great was the voice of the god, and that the statue must surely be hidden in a place far from anyone's thoughts. And indeed, he finds it and discovers that its value is hidden in the mouth of the statue of Alexander the Great. And indeed, he finds it and discovers that its value is hidden in the mouth of the statue of Alexander the Great. At that moment, Layla enters, shocked, while Stephen enjoys the achievement he has accomplished. But Layla asks him about what happened to her father, and Marc appears, confirming to her that he has nothing to do with what happened to her father in the past, and that his partner killed all the archaeologists who were present out of greed, including her father, Abdullah al-Fuli. When Marc tried to save her father, the partner killed him too, but Marc didn't die. He was revived and became part of the entity he was embodied in. Suddenly, they hear a sound coming from afar, so Layla runs to hide, while Marc goes to take Alexander the Great's axe and stands waiting. Alexander's followers arrive armed, and Marc tries to convince them to join him now that he is free, but before they can approach him, he starts killing them one by one. Then Marc pulls out a gun and starts shooting, while the family remains hidden and watches what happens, and in the end, they are all killed. At the last moment, Marc's body sinks into the water and he dies, but he enters another time dimension and wakes up to find himself in a psychiatric hospital, discovering that everything that happened was just an illusion. Layla comes and tells him that she changed the movie because he was watching it more than 5 times a week. Also, Egyptian drawings that she had hung up are shown on the board. Marc tries to communicate with Stephen, but he doesn't respond. And when he tries to stand up, he falls to the ground because he was tied to a wheelchair. So the nurses come to put him back in the chair, but he doesn't understand what is happening around him. He sees the Moon Knight doll lying on the ground, and the nurse tries to take it to the hospital director's office. With clarity of vision, he discovers that the nurse had given him a sedative because of his behavior and the problems he was causing. Marc sees the crutch and the statue of the god, and he immediately remembers what happened to him when Harrow shot him. He stands terrified and tries to move away from them, but he falls due to the drug's effect. The nurses come to hold him, but he hits them all and escapes. He hides in a room and closes the door behind him to find a coffin inside with a person trapped in it, screaming and wanting to get out. And when he opens the coffin, he finds Stephen in front of him, and they both feel shocked by how they got separated. Marc asks Stephen about the last thing he remembers, and Stephen replies that he remembers when Harrow shot them. Marc and Stephen exit together, running from the room, until they reach another room containing a sarcophagus with a person inside it moving violently and wanting to get out. However, they leave it and continue walking until they reach the end of the corridor where a door opens, and suddenly the ancient Egyptian god of evil appears to them. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button